1583. On a smoke-covered ridge, an army stood frozen, its general refusing to attack. His ally was being crushed just beyond the hill. He had once been banished for murder. Now he held two armies' fates in his hands. Why did Maeda Toshiie refuse to fight? He killed a man over a stolen hairpin. Nobunaga banished him on the spot. Yet this killer would become Japan's richest lord. How did a murderer build an empire? In 1551, a 13-year-old boy named Maeda Toshiie entered the service of a young, unpredictable lord, Oda Nobunaga. Toshiie was unusually tall for his age, with a temper that matched his height. As a kosho, a page who attended his lord in battle and at court, he was expected to show absolute discipline. But even as a boy, Toshiie's quick fists and quicker pride hinted at a flaw that would nearly destroy his career before it began. For now, though, he was simply one of many ambitious young men serving in Nobunaga's growing household. Among Nobunaga's young attendants was another low-born retainer, Kinoshita Tokichiro, a former peasant with sharp wit and bigger ambitions than his rank allowed. He and Toshiie became close friends, two outsiders climbing the same ladder. On the battlefield, Toshiie's skill set him apart. Wielding an unusually long spear with devastating speed, he earned a nickname that would follow him for life, Yari no Mataza, Mataza of the spear. By his late teens, he was already known as one of the most dangerous young warriors in Nobunaga's army, but his temper remained just as sharp as his blade. In 1559, that temper finally caught up with him. During a public event, a court attendant named Juami mocked Toshiie and made off with a treasured ornament he wore in his hair. Enraged, Toshiie chased him down and killed him on the spot, in full view of Nobunaga's court. It was a flagrant breach of discipline, and Nobunaga's rule was absolute. Toshiie was stripped of his position and banished from service. At 21 years old, the rising star of Nobunaga's army was suddenly a ronin, a masterless samurai with no income, no rank, and no future. Most men in Toshiie's position would have fled or faded into obscurity. Instead, he did something almost unthinkable. He kept fighting for the lord who had cast him out. When Nobunaga's army marched to battle, Toshiie followed, unofficially, unpaid, uninvited. He charged into the fighting alongside soldiers who no longer answered to him, taking enemy heads and risking his life for a master who owed him nothing. It was a desperate gamble. Prove his worth so completely that Nobunaga would have no choice but to take him back. His chance came in 1560 at the Battle of Okehazama. Against overwhelming odds, Nobunaga's small force launched a surprise attack on the much larger army of Imagawa Yoshimoto and won one of the most stunning victories in Japanese history. Toshiie was there, fighting without rank or pay, and he took an enemy head in the chaos of battle. It was exactly the kind of performance he needed. Nobunaga, impressed by the loyalty and skill of the man he had exiled, began to soften. The path back to favor was finally opening.
By 1561, after nearly 2 years in exile, Toshiie was formally reinstated into Nobunaga's service. Throughout his disgrace, his wife, his cousin Matsu, married to him since his teenage years, had stood by him, managing their household with no income and no certainty he would ever be restored. Intelligent, resourceful, and fiercely loyal, she would go on to run the Maeda household's affairs for decades to come. With his position restored and his household secure, Toshiie threw himself back into Nobunaga's campaigns with renewed purpose. The disgraced exile was determined never to fall so far again. Over the next 2 decades, Toshiie rose steadily through Nobunaga's ranks. He fought in campaign after campaign, eventually serving under the veteran general Shibata Katsuie in the brutal Hokuriku region, battling the fanatical Iko-Iki warrior monks and the forces of the powerful Uesugi clan. Toshiie proved himself not just as a fighter, but as a capable commander, eventually receiving his own territory in Noto province. The exiled killer had become a trusted general, one of the men Nobunaga relied on to secure the edges of his growing empire.
Then, in June 1582, everything changed. While Toshiie and Katsuie were locked in a grinding siege against Uesugi forces in distant Echu province, word arrived from the capital. Nobunaga was dead, murdered by his own general Akechi Mitsuhide at Honnoji Temple. The 2 men who might have avenged him fastest, Toshiie and Katsuie, were hundreds of kilometers away, pinned down by enemy forces they couldn't simply abandon. Instead, it was Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Toshiie's old friend from his page days, who raced back, crushed Mitsuhide, and emerged as Nobunaga's avenger. The balance of power had shifted overnight.
With Nobunaga gone, 2 men now stood as the dominant forces in his former domain: Hideyoshi, the Avenger, and Shibata Katsui, the senior general and Toshiie's immediate superior. The 2 rivals could not coexist for long. By early 1583, their rivalry had hardened into open war. Toshiie found himself in an impossible position. Katsui was his commander, the man he had served loyally for years. Hideyoshi was his oldest friend, the boy he had grown up beside as a low-ranking page. Whichever side won, Toshiie's choices on the battlefield were about to matter enormously. In April 1583, the 2 armies clashed near Shizukatake. Toshiie's forces held a key position on the battlefield, ordered by Katsuie to hold the line against Hideyoshi's advance. But as the fighting intensified and Katsuie's other commanders began to falter, Toshie's troops did something extraordinary. They simply stopped fighting. No charge, no retreat order, just silence while the battle raged around them. Soldiers on both sides could see it happening. Whatever Toshiie decided in the next few hours would determine not just the outcome of the battle, but his own fate. Toshiie made his choice. He withdrew his forces from the field entirely,
without engaging Hideyoshi's army. For Katsuie, it was a fatal blow. With one of his strongest commanders gone, his line collapsed and his army was routed. Katsuie fled to his stronghold at Kitanosho Castle, where he would soon take his own life rather than surrender. Toshiie had not lifted his spear against his former lord, but by refusing to fight for him, he had sealed Katsuie's destruction just as surely as if he had. Days later, Toshiie rode to Hideyoshi's camp, not as a prisoner, but to formally surrender his allegiance. By the rules of the era, Hideyoshi could have executed him as a traitor to Katsuie, or stripped him of everything as a defeated enemy commander. Instead, Hideyoshi welcomed his old friend with open arms. The two men who had once been penniless attendants together decades earlier now stood as the two most powerful warlords to emerge from Nobunaga's old domain. Hideyoshi didn't just spare Toshiie. He was about to make him one of the richest men in Japan.
As a reward for his support, Hideyoshi granted Toshiie the province of Kaga, centered on a small castle town called Kanazawa. Over the following years, Toshiie and his successors expanded their holdings until the Maeda domain reached an almost unimaginable size: 1 million koku of rice production a year, enough to feed 1 million people. It became known as Kaga Hyakuman Goku, the million koku domain of Kaga, the largest territory held by any lord who was not a member of the ruling Toyotomi or later Tokugawa families. The exile who once had nothing now controlled one of Japan's great fortunes.
But Toshiie didn't just accumulate wealth. He spent it transforming Kanazawa into a center of culture and craftsmanship. He patronized tea masters, no theater, and gold leaf artisans, laying the foundations for traditions that still define Kanazawa today, centuries later. Unlike many Sengoku warlords who knew only war, Toshiie used his hard-won fortune to build something that would outlast every battlefield he had ever fought on. The man once exiled for killing in a fit of rage now presided over one of the most refined courts in Japan, a transformation almost no one could have predicted in 1559.
In 1598, Hideyoshi died, leaving behind a 5-year-old heir, Hideyori, and a council of powerful regents known as the Go-Tairo, the Council of 5 Elders, to govern until the boy came of age. Toshiie, now in his 60s, was one of the 5. He moved into Osaka Castle to personally watch over young Hideyori, the son of the friend who had once forgiven him everything. It was, in many ways, the final act of their friendship. Toshiie protecting Hideyoshi's legacy with the same loyalty he had once shown, too late, to Oda Nobunaga. But the peace was fragile. Among the 5 elders was Tokugawa Ieyasu, the most powerful daimyo in Japan, and a man with ambitions of his own. Tensions rose quickly. Rumors of plots, of Ieyasu maneuvering to seize control of the young Hideyori. Toshiie, respected by all sides as a man of honor, worked to keep the uneasy peace, traveling personally to smooth over disputes before they exploded into war. For 1 more year, his presence alone seemed to hold Japan's fragile balance of power together, a balance that had taken his entire life and one bloody mistake to build. In 1599, Maeda Toshiie died of illness at the age of 61. Within months, the tensions he had worked to contain broke into open conflict, leading to the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600 and the rise of the Tokugawa shogunate. Yet the domain Toshiie built endured. The Maeda clan ruled Kaga for over 2.5 centuries, surviving the fall of the Toyotomi and the entire Tokugawa era, the only outside clan ever to hold 1,000,000 koku. Today, Kanazawa's gold leaf crafts and elegant gardens still trace their origins to the exiled spearmen who refused to give up.
Toshiie's story is one of mercy, a single act of rage forgiven, leading to unimaginable reward. But the man he served most of his life, Oda Nobunaga, was not always so forgiving. 11 years before Honnoji, in 1571, Nobunaga ordered an attack that shocked even his own allies: the burning of Mount Hiei, one of Japan's holiest sites, and the slaughter of everyone inside: monks, women, and children. Why would the same warlord order one of history's most brutal massacres?
Maeda Toshiie's story is one of the most remarkable transformations in Sengoku, Japan. From a disgraced killer banished in shame to the founder of the richest samurai domain in the country's history. His temper nearly destroyed him, but his loyalty, proven again and again on the battlefield, built an empire that outlasted the Toyotomi and the Tokugawa alike. If you enjoyed this story of disgrace, redemption, and fortune, subscribe for new Samurai Chronicles episodes every day, and tell us in the comments, should Nobunaga have forgiven him so easily?